Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Wil Talk with Artists. My name is Martha Campbell, and I am MFA's Communications Manager. Our digital discussion tonight is with abstract artist and exhibits fabricator Carey Crane. After graduating with his Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree in painting from the University of Florida, Gainesville, Carey became an exhibits fabricator and project manager, sculpting, mold making, and painting realistic models, dioramas, and environments for museums and zoos. Crane now lives in Shady Side, Maryland, and is working as the senior designer and curator of exhibits at the Calvert Marine Museum. I would also like to introduce the host of our show, Wil Scott. Wil is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs for the National Gallery of Art. He is uniquely qualified to help bridge the gap between artists and the public, and he will be our guide into the art world tonight. So I think with that, we are all ready. So Wil, do you want to go?
All right. Thank you, Martha, for that introduction and your always excellent support for these programs. And before we make Carey, wow, good, he's live. I just want to say, for full disclosure, Carey and I are not related in any way, even though we may appear so. So there's no nepotism here. You don't think we look similar? I see that expression on your face, Martha.
There's a beard involved. That's about it, I see.
Well, we're older guys who have on linen shirts, you know, and glasses. So anyway, well, I'm glad. Let's go. Let's go with the real meat of the program. Carey works at a great institution in Southern Maryland, where I think you know the MFA recently had an exhibition that was organized jointly with the two institutions. And his work as an artist is very impressive. And more impressive is the fact that he has such a full and heavy workload at the museum, and yet he's able to create some really outstanding artwork. So I think the first thing that we have in our, well, I was going to say slide carousel, but we don't have slide carousels. In our PowerPoint, do you even know what a slide carousel is, Martha?
Vaguely, yes. I understand the concept.
Okay. Well, let's have the first slide and we'll begin talking about that. Okay, this is the view that Carey provided for the interior of the Marine Museum, and it's really a beautiful place. And I did not know when we enlisted Carey and he agreed to do this, that he was responsible in such a great extent for what we see here, because I was very impressed when I visited our recent show and took a look around the whole museum. So Carey, how did you get to be such an excellent designer and artist? That's a big lift.
Thank you. It's about a 40-year question. First of all, I'd like to say that I work with an amazing team, so I can point out kind of what I did in this slide and what we do, but of course I don't do it by myself. Well, it is a long story. Basically, it starts back in 1982, finding myself with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and I was working in a pizza place, doing pretty good. I'd moved from busboy to salad maker. But a really fortunate thing happened for me was the head of the Department of Interpretation at the Florida Museum of Natural History wanted to start a small exhibits company, and somehow he reached out to my senior painting instructor Hiram Williams, who got in touch with me, and that kind of started me down this road, working for museum services, but also for the Florida Museum of Natural History. And really learning the basics there. So basics that some of these things don't even exist as a practice much anymore. Silk screening, mechanical production for prints, but probably more faux painting, sculpting, lime rock caves, and mold making and sculpting small figures.
Well, Carey, let me interrupt you there for a minute.
Sure.
Where is the Florida Museum of Natural History?
Sorry, Gainesville, Florida. I graduated from the University of Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I will not hold it against you that I've just discovered you're a Gator, because I'm a Seminole.
It's all behind us.
But so what I really wanted to ask though is you were studying studio art for your BFA, right? And so this was a little bit of a shift in focus. Was that something that you think helped you develop as a painter, as a creator of two-dimensional visual arts, or not?
Absolutely. And again, I'm so glad that happened for me. I was rereading Hiram's book, Notes to a Young Painter, and he talks about how really difficult it is for an art student to go out there and make a living as an artist. Nearly impossible. Bless all the folks that can do it without a lot of help. But I think what really helped me develop as a person was practical application of what I'd learned in art. So
so how did you, it's a big jump from Florida and Gainesville and Natural History Museum to this, even though this is more of a, it's closer to that kind of museum than to a full-fledged art-only museum. So can you quickly sort of step us through how you got from there to here, and then we'll look at your work.
Quickly. So I was working at the small, basically a lot of the shifts in my life have been relationships or money, work. But so I was working in a small company. My partner at the time moved back to North Carolina outside of Chapel Hill, and I wanted to go. I did, and I started a very small, actually working out of a sweet potato barn. I started a small company, and the company Museum Services that I had been working for got me employment. I started picking up some other jobs. So for a number of years, I was working on my own. I went back to work for Museum Services as they were growing and starting to do work for MGM Studio, or MGM Theme Park, I should say, Hollywood Boulevard. I worked on that. Then eventually I went to work at the North Carolina Museum of History, and that's where I started getting a little bit more involved in the administrative supervising point of my career. Still lots of hands-on things. Well, some years went by there. Basically, the $35 million museum, which was a lot of money at the time, and we worked for 3 years straight on. We finished, and there wasn't that much work to do. So someone thought that they could turn me into a computer programmer, which is just nuts. But about that time, I had the opportunity to work at the North Carolina Zoological Park. Worked there for 5 years, picked up a lot of skills, working on containment, but artificial rock work and enrichment for animals. I'm trying to move fast because it's a lot of years. Then
you work for the North Carolina Museum of Art?
No, natural history.
Yeah, all natural history. Yeah.
Oh, actually, history. Sorry.
History, yeah.
Natural history and history are right across from each other. I have worked over the years. I worked at the Appleton Museum of Art in Ocala. I've worked in galleries. So I also have had the art side experience in my career.
So how did you find the time to keep developing yourself as a visual artist when these are heavy workloads that you're talking about, it sounds like to me?
Well, as partly a release, because it's I love museum work, I love curating, I love working with a team, I love the whole process. But when I'm painting, no one else is in the room, no self-consciousness, ego. I make the rules, I change the rules, I do what I want, and that's very freeing to me and enriching.
Yeah. Well, let's look at some of what you are doing in the studio or have done in the studio. There's just so much energy in this, Carey, I think, and it's but it's not wild, it's not uncontrolled. There's clearly a very well, to me it seems clear that there's a very strong sense of control over what you're doing, even though it's energetic and fluid. So tell us a little bit about why this subject presented in, you know, you can see the plant, but it at first doesn't emerge. You have to sort of look for it with the clue of the title, I think. So what's really going on here? How'd you create this image?
So I clearly love mark making. I love paint. I love liquid color. I love everything that have an affinity, I think, for what acrylic can do. But I also have I think, a strong underlying graphic sense. And I seriously attribute this to Looney Tunes, cartoons. I love the comics. I wanted to be an illustrator when my father was, as an artist, but he was also a cartoonist. So I think I always have that kind of sensibility of a animation cell or a frame in a comic. So kind of that simple forms. It's more evident in some of these than others. But also, I specifically wanted to include this because of the agave form. I've kind of been doing a plant form, or almost like radiating form, for many, many years. And it became more and more an agave form in New Mexico, which makes a lot of sense. So that's the underlying structure. Hiram taught a vocabulary of forms, Hiram Williams, and once you have that basic form icon, you can take that in all kinds of directions. So we really can't delve into that today with the time we have, but this is kind of
let me ask you a couple of art historical questions quickly, then, and we'll move to the next slide. Did your mentor ever refer to Arthur Wesley Dow in his teaching practice?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. Arthur Wesley Dow was an early 20th century artist and very influential teacher. What you just said about your mentor seems parallel. But now I'll turn to something specific. There are these patterns of X's or crosses. How does that relate to the agave plant?
How does it? It's more of a, it's more visual than directly being associated with the agave plant. And just for fun, I'd like to say those are, those X patterns are from the little dividers you use when you're laying tile. Laid on top of the paint and then enamel sprayed over them. So I read something great from Mark Bradford just very recently. He said, if I can't find it at Home Depot, it's not for Mark Bradford. So that's about a third of my approach, but I really enjoyed that quote.
Okay, there's a little bit of a conflict or a contradiction that I'm seeing or hearing here. And I want to ask you this question. The agave title gives it a certain direction in our visual analysis, our interaction. But what you're describing to me, as I look at the image and hear you speak about it, is a visual language that is almost fully abstract and very, very beautiful. Do you sense that there's any kind of tension or contradiction going on there?
No, I think that form is the starting point. So you have to respond to something to get started, and then it becomes a conversation with the work, and one mark suggests the next. So I would say it's a starting point, and that's why an agave form can go in so many directions. It becomes more of a formal concern.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the agave plant is more of a trigger. You're not trying to represent it or say something about agave in the Southwest. It's
no. Not being that literal.
Okay.
It's improvisation, so it's like Miles Davis starting with my funny Valentine, and there it goes.
Yep. Okay, Martha, let's look at the next image. This is so much more dense visually and maybe conceptually than the other, and they're from about the same time. Are you consciously, each time you sit at your easel as you go to your studio, trying to explore a new direction, or is there any kind of connection that you intentionally are creating between these two examples, for instance?
I will sometimes think I've just done this, so now I'm going to do that. It's kind of what I'm saying. It's always a game where I get to change the rules one to the next. Also with me, I can start, and I've done this very recently, I can start two works at exactly the same time with the same approach, and they go different directions. So if you look at my work over a long period of time, I would say I'm not kind of in a linear fashion. I sort of circle back to similar approaches. So you can kind of see similarities over a long stretch of time where one piece may look completely different than the next piece or several that I do.
Well, then, so the Treasure Island is something for us to discover rather than something that you has inspired this image. This image exists on its own, independent of anything else.
It does. I would say, though, and I think a very strong influence on this is I've been living in New Mexico for many years and didn't get home to St. Petersburg, Treasure Island, Florida, very often at all. And I was fortunate enough to travel to my father and Heidi's house and sit out and look out over the water for a few days, and came back and worked on this almost immediately. So it has a real kind of has a Florida influence to it as well.
Yeah, it certainly does in the color palette and the blues and the sort of golden yellow hues as well. So that's very, very beautiful. Next slide, please.
So Martha, I'd like you to toggle back and forth between the last one and this one, because I didn't realize it till we were putting it together. But if you were to do a schematic of the design, they're actually pretty similar. And yeah, so basically you've got these strong horizontals with your two circular forms. And then back to the next slide, certain signs. It's, again, I mean, if you were to graph this out schematically, it's very much the same design, but not anything I was thinking of.
There's a lot of resonance for me as an art historian with some of the influential artists of the mid-20th century. You know, you're not working on quite the same scale, but you're working on a substantial scale. And I see all this, the mark making and the sort of visual language that you're creating for yourself. Are there any particular artists that you're influenced by, you know, from the museum world, the art world?
I would say primarily my father and Hiram, and something in common with both of them is not specific lessons, but actually watching them in the act of painting. And I would kind of describe that as a sure hand and a keen eye. I mean, there was a lot of looking, but then really delving into it. I think I am influenced by cartoons and illustrations and the cells and simplicity, kind of the graphic approach. Matisse early on. Rauschenberg, who I don't necessarily philosophically have a lot in common with, but I think I was really drawn to him by some of his, the idea of multiplicity.
Yes.
And collage, of course, coming through my father, but the idea that there could be so much going on a surface and you can take one discrete area from one part and another discrete area from the other, and they don't seem to relate necessarily, but they do work as a whole.
Yeah, that really is sort of what I was thinking of, is someone like Rauschenberg and what you were just describing about sort of layering. That also, to me, suggests you've referred to cells for cartoons and, you know, animation and that sort of thing. Do you literally mean the way cells lay over each other to create the final image? That kind of layering?
Yes, and kind of just the simplified blocking. For example, in Hanna-Barbera cartoons where they're running, but in the background's just repeating and going back and forth. But kind of that it's a simple graphic way of displaying something. I don't tend to work towards simplicity, but all of your images that I've seen really, I think, would sustain a lot of repeated engagement. You know, you didn't see something, but the next time you walked in and took a look at your work, you'd see something else, and those things would kind of build on one another. Whether you're thinking the viewer will experience that or not, I don't think is critical importance even to an art historian. It's happening. You know, you got a lot there.
a lot to see, a lot to experience.
I think I have a lot of influences, but I think a lot of artists, you're probably on your path, and people start at different points in their life. But for me, by mid-20s, the basic concept of what I'm trying to accomplish, it hasn't changed that much. So
okay.
I feel I'm drawn to a lot of different types of artwork, more like an affinity, but I'm not influenced strongly by a particular artist now. Can I add something fun about this piece?
Sure.
Relating to my museum work is, some of you that know about vinyl letters know that basically you have a plotter with a blade on it that's cutting the letters out. So before you can, and this is a process that sort of replaced silk screening in the museum world, but you have to do what's called weeding, which is pulling out all the negative adhesive vinyl from around the letters. So for this piece, I collected all the weeding and used those to mask off areas. So you can see very specific areas. So I think that's fun for the museum folks out there. I also have some letterpress letters in there where I sprayed some enamel over wet paint, pressed the letterpress in there, and it lifted the enamel and left some of these Z's you see kind of through the center and other forms. And then went back in and did some kind of calligraphic lines to sort of tie things together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at first glance, it looks kind of chaotic, but the longer I look at it, the more it does seem to coalesce. And there is a structure within it. And that makes sense. What you just said is, it sounds to me like a process that would add structure to such a energetic composition. But
and the more trivia, the two circles are garbage can lids. I laid down spray around, so giving away my secret.
Have you ever made a video of yourself working in the studio?
No, I've taken still shots of process. But
well, I think it'd be fascinating to see a video of you at work. Well, we can't do that, so let's go on to the next image, Martha. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm fascinated by this one. I like the palette, and I see those circular forms repeating, and of course the squares or cubes. So what's the orange dance that we're looking at?
Well, you can see right down here in the bottom right-hand corner is a little orange tree in a container.
Oh, okay.
You can see an orange above that.
Uh-huh.
You can see, to my eye, upper center, just off to the left, there's someone doing a figure doing a pirouette. Things like the figure, and then I see lots of monster spaces and things going on like that. The orange tree was very intentional. The dancer and other elements were not intentional, but there they are.
So when you've evolved a composition like this one, are those other images, you started with the potted orange tree, are those other images that you're talking about adding in things that are in your studio or things that are purely in your imagination?
In my environment, not necessarily our house or our studio. A visual artist, an abstract visual artist, anything you literally take in with your vision is going to probably find its way into your work, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
Certainly something like the orange tree is very literal. This is really evocative of Las Cruces to me, the blues and the oranges and the colors. One more thing I'd like to say about this is I started with that kind of splash of green in the center, and then painting out with washes, and then the grid is superimposed. Again, I'm trying to pull a form together. Once I had those divisions, then I worked into those again, almost like a storyboard or a cartoon comic strip or something, where you're kind of working individually into each of those areas. Again, hopefully it all somehow pulls together as a composition.
Well, to that point, for me, all your work definitely does. As I said a moment ago, I think at first glance, things seem to be so energetic and so disparate that there's not a center, but the longer that you look at it, the more structure and cohesiveness there is visually and conceptually. So I think that kudos to you for being able to bring that off. All right, next slide. This is very elegant in comparison to the other pieces you've selected. Is it just the palette that's making me say that, do you think, or did you intend something like that?
I like this one. I really like this one because of the restraint, which I'm not necessarily given to. The palette, you can see the grid. Again, this is a very, actually the paper, if you look carefully, I found a paper that has that kind of that 4-inch grid in it. I started with that. I also think part of this kind of, this is more purely collage than anything else we're going to see today. And that tends to slow you down. So you're cutting, selecting, placing. I think the structure is probably common to a lot of the other pieces that might seem more frenetic, but the understructure is very, very apparent here. Also used some gold leaf in here, and then a solution you use to patina. So I poured that liquid over the metallic, and it gave all these nice verdigris through here, which it's not a color, but that's my favorite, probably my favorite color, is that effect you get with the patina on bronze and copper.
Have you done any other works that are similar in their restraint, their palette, and their form?
I do have some others from this period. I'd like to get back to this, but doesn't seem to be where my work takes me these days.
Well, you use the word period in an art historical way, and yet I think in our conversation the other day and today, you've emphasized that your work is not easily divided into periods or phases. Is what I just said more correct?
When I say period, I mean I did very similar work within probably a week or two period of time.
Good. Well, I'm glad to, at least for me, I'm glad to get that clarification. Any other little anecdotes or information you wanted to share about this one before we move on?
I think that about, well, one anecdote is this was probably created during, there was kind of a golden age of collage paper. There was a company called New York Central, and they went out of business, but they were amazing. They put out this catalog that was like Travel Smith, and they would describe all these little paper makers internationally. And you couldn't order online. You had to call New York, get them on the phone. They would tell you whether they had the paper or not, and order over the telephone. But you'll notice my new work has very little collage in it. I miss it, but I just can't find the papers I was able to get during this period.
That's too bad, because this is, I think of all the things that I've seen of your work so far, this is the one that I would be most drawn to personally. This is a very fine piece of work. So is the next slide the last one, Martha? How many more do we have? Four?
Let's move.
Three. All right. Yeah, let's move anyway. Well, this is not visually completely unlike the last piece, but it's certainly chaff over water. That's very evocative. Are you trying to say something about spreading the chaff and the?
It was, it's about a literal place to me, and of course it is evocative. It's not literal, but I used to drive, that's a Naval Research Center kind of south of Chesapeake Beach. There's this amazing road that is just through the woods, if you know it.
I've ridden my bike on that road.
High cliffs, well, for many years, that's been a Naval Research Center, particularly, I think, radar, but who knows what goes on there. But chaff is something you would scatter to confuse or mask radar signals. So I see the green, I see going through the woods, I see a storm. The original title had to do with a storm going on over the Chesapeake. And then these kind of radar or, facility towers and radar, what am I trying to say? Yeah, the facility basically, and the natural.
Well, Carey, I know that place pretty well. I have literally cycled by it many times and driven by it a few times. And I think this is a very, very compelling and complete evocation of the experiences I've had in that place. But I think it works even without having a personal connection. It works purely on visual and aesthetic terms. And I don't know, I'm just so pleased to be able to get to know you and your work better. I don't try to gush over the artist, but I'm very impressed that you're able to sort of do these different things and bring together the sort of literally and metaphorically this layering into your work. I think that's very impressive to me. So let's roll along. We have two more and we want to share them. This is almost like a piece of jazz. Do you listen to jazz? You made a reference to Miles Davis, I think, earlier on.
I listen to a fairly broad. I do listen to Miles Davis in particular in jazz. Completely free form jazz kind of loses me because again, I do like that underlying structure and improvisation.
Uh-huh.
But
so you
Miles
like kind of Blue more than his late stuff.
Yeah, his late stuff's pretty great too, but yeah, who doesn't love Kind of Blue?
Yeah, that's true. So what dropping acorns? I mean, you know, when I see the title, I see the acorns, but if you took away the title and just showed me this as untitled number 72, it still has so much energy in it that it would be equally compelling. So why bother with the title?
So I love that this is a very literal painting, abstract painting. If we had time to talk about it too, I think you can see the seasons in my work. And this was on a beautiful day, early fall, under an oak tree in our yard, working flat on a tabletop. And I took a charcoal pencil and drew the shadows around the shadows of the leaves above, and then worked back into those. And there were acorns literally falling. So I've worked some acorns in there as well, but that's a very literal title and literal initiation.
I hope this will be my last art historical question of our conversation, but are you familiar with Kandinsky's work?
Yes.
And so have you read Concerning the Spiritual in Art?
Only in art history, and no, I have not completely, I have not.
Did that make an impression on you? Because this is sort of, I think, more than some of the other works that we've looked at and talked about, really the kind of thing that I think he was encouraging modern artists to do, is to work in the way that you described and to use form and color as an expressive vocabulary that wasn't necessarily connected to objective reality. So you came to this on your own, more or less, through your mentors and.
I love Kandinsky. I love Poussin d'Art. When I read about their spiritual approach to art, I get lost because I want to look at the art, and I think it affects me that way rather than I'm just not really an intellectual, and I know some intellectuals, but I respond to things viscerally and visually more than and certainly read a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to hear that you're aware of it, but you think of your approach to abstraction in a much different way. So that was very satisfying to me to hear. I hope it wasn't too trivial for the rest of the audience. I'm sure most of them know about the Concerning the Spiritual. Last one then, Martha?
Second to last, I think, but so we got to keep moving, Martha, sorry. Yeah, this was in a recent MFA show.
Yeah.
If I can riff a little bit on this, I think is the agave form that's turned into a creature. Wow. And a lot of people have told me they see a fish in here, which I didn't. This happens all the time. I didn't see a fish in here until someone said there's a fish and there's a fish. So it's also interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but this this is my second COVID period when we were put on administrative leave and the museum basically shut down for several months. So not much good has come out of COVID, but I was able to paint. And I don't know, I maybe there's some anxiety in here, maybe there's some reflection of the source, but just background.
Yeah. You know, I didn't see the fish until you started to talk about it, and I had to search for it, but because I was seeing octopi, little green octopi swimming around.
I think those forms become tentacles sometimes, creatures.
Yeah. Now I'm seeing more larger, different colored octopi. So is there any sense of deliberation to the palette? You know, your palette here is a little different from what you've been doing before. Mixing.
The last one I forgot to mention, the falling acorns. Anyone who works with me is going to say aubergine, because we were working on an exhibit, and it was probably the only chance in my life I'm ever going to get to paint like major walls, purple, eggplant. We did so. Yeah, the purples are very much have been on my mind for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And the greens I've used greens for a while, but the greens are much more coming in to play since we moved back to Maryland.
Yeah, I just took a road trip out to the west, and the biggest difference to me is the flat land, but also the browns and the yellows instead of all the green. And our green is very intense this year, I think, because we had a moist, cool spring.
Yeah, it's hard to deal with it for a while coming back here. It was like the Emerald Isle or something here.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I agree. All right, last one. This seems like a whole new direction, and why don't you tell us a little bit about it, because I'm very interested in the title.
An artist friend of mine, maybe about a year ago, really encouraged me to work larger and to kind of tap into my experience living near the Chesapeake. So this is one of 4 or 5 works I've done since last fall, and much more kind of waves and clouds. And I think it also has something to do with the difference. We also didn't get into this much, but the difference between New Mexico works and Maryland works is humidity. There's this feeling, and I think you're kind of seeing here, is that the edges aren't as hard, the colors aren't as saturated necessarily. So that does influence that. And not to make too strong a point of it, but there's been some losses recently, and I think that's reflected here. Maybe some minor keynotes. As much activity is going on here, there's a lot of more of kind of a muted palette.
Yes.
That I've pulled into it. So
it's very aquatic to me, and I'm struck by your saying that you're responding more to your current environment, and certainly the storminess and the transition from one weather condition, one moment, one day to another on the Chesapeake. I really can sense that. But the reason I was struck by the title is, do you ever read Shaw?
No.
George Bernard Shaw?
No.
Because one of the poems that I had to read in my senior high school English class has a passage of the widening gyre, you know, the way that birds of prey spin up into the sky, things fall apart. And there is that, not in an oppressive, I think, or ominous way, but to me, there is that kind of sense of things spreading and moving apart. I was just curious if that had any impact.
Absolutely, and I can't call everything vortex now, but I think the recent paintings that's the kind of feeling I'm trying to get, is kind of a roiling, circling pattern. Well,
it's been great spending this time with you and looking at your work and hearing you talk about it. And I think it's really very exceptional work. And now we've done a little better than we did 2 weeks ago. And I think let's see what our audience wants to ask about your work and your career. So it's open mic. Sort of.
I have sort of a basic question, I guess, which is not as exciting as something philosophical. But you work in large sizes, typically, yes. Like some of the pieces on here were 64 inches long. So do you do your stretching your canvases yourself? Or how do you
Yes,
work
I
through
do.
that?
Well,
Do you work on
I use-
non-stretch and then stretch?
It's interesting, and there's so much we haven't even touched on about acrylic paint and application, but something important about the recent ones, and that last one included, is I've worked on those unstretched, raw canvas, literally on the ground, starting with a brush as large as a mason's brush, or a 4-inch painting brush, and drawing and going in gesturally. I work it to a certain point, and then I stretch it. I do a very loose stretch until I'm done with it, because so much is going on with the canvas that it needs to adjust to. But then I'll go in and do what I call pointing, which is start delineating areas, sharpening areas, popping areas, maybe add some collage elements. And then I'll usually move from the ground or a table often up onto an easel, working with maybe a number 12 filbert or something. So I kind of go from these, that's kind of the joke I was making about Home Depot. I'm using Home Depot paints and brushes and tools, and then kind of to more traditional now acrylics and brushes.
So is that a change, using that process and larger brushes and instruments?
It's more of a return, probably, because I think I worked that way 35 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Strangely, or maybe not strangely enough, living, my dad's studio is on Tampa Bay. So I think something about being outside. And I also like the idea of being, and this probably ties into being curator, and we know the magic of a session when something that's an everyday thing becomes precious. I really want to get my painting out of the laboratory setting. One of the biggest impressions on me ever was a photograph of Robert Rauschenberg's loft, and one of his silk screens laying on the floor, and his dog was curled up on it. And that said a lot to me, and I appreciate that. And art patrons out there, remove all hair and organic matters, so most organic for paintings before they go on the gallery wall. And I see them. I mean, it's part of our process. Is I start with a staining, and I use surfactant with the acrylic, which basically you can keep a very hard line with a wash and acrylics, or you can add a surfactant, Dawn soap, a couple of drops, and that will allow the paint to just soak in.
Yeah.
And then I start building up harder edged impastos and things on top of that. But
good question, Martha.
And you said something about scale. It's as you said, it's all relative. The abstract expressionists, you have like paintings that are 30 feet across, so relatively large scale.
Do you think that the size is necessary for your work, or do you think that because you based on the images that we can see on our screen, it includes so much detail that it almost seems like to try and make something of that size would not be impossible at the size that I'm seeing it on my screen. So is it just that you really enjoy working in large sizes, or could you ever see yourself working in something a little more petite?
It affects the way you work physically. I can't do, and I have a lot of friends that can and do it well. I can't do a 4-inch square. I can't do it. I can't do this. You get 24 by 36 in that size, you're using your arm. You get larger than that, you're really, Pollock being the classic example, you're working over it, you're kind of using your whole body. So that does affect the outcome. So I can't work, I wish I could, I can't work very small.
So the physicality that you're describing is key to you in the way that you feel comfortable working, right?
Yeah, and it depends on the work. Like we were going back to that earlier collage that you like so much, that's cutting, that's placing, that's not a physical painting, but this last one we looked at, absolutely.
Okay, well, that work in particular, I could imagine that being at a very small size. So what is it that keeps you from working on that small size? You said you just can't work, and you made a gesture like this, which I get, but why not?
I have been able to do some fairly small collages, but I think I need at least 18-inch. I got to be able to this much.
Yeah,
it's just restrained. It's like I'm just restricted. I need to move,
you being yourself, Ben. You need that space. Okay.
I just have a comment, not a question. And that is, you mentioned on several of your works that you are trying to create a language on this large canvas. And I noticed also you have a lot of circular and curvilinear forms that are on the rectilinear canvas, which really does say that you are controlling the language. You're not necessarily having the canvas affect what you're doing. And yet a couple of the pieces, like the collage we were referring to, that you are dividing the canvas into a grid area, creates this integrated, and actually we'll use that word, a really handsome integrated composition where the form of the canvas does integrate into the end result. And I kind of think those pieces are really great. And yet, rectilinear imagery of water, air, and this is one thing you didn't say, but I see a lot of wind and motion in your work and these fluid shapes that look like movement. So that is something, a feature of your work that I just find to be really enticing, makes me want to follow those lines. So anyway.
Thank you. I feel like there's a lot I didn't get to say. I was very nervous about doing this today, but I'm enjoying this. Yeah, the circle and the square, the circle. I noticed that I kind of learned some things putting this presentation together with Martha, and it's that there are circles in every single one of these examples, including the museum exhibit. There's a prominent circle right in the foreground. So that's true. And again, I don't want to make too strong a point of it, but my father's cartoons and his most influential work on me during the 60s when I was a kid growing up and hanging out in the studio almost always had a moon. So there was a circle, and his cartoons often, the cartoons are often based on squares or circles. So it's got to be in there.
Yeah. Joe, I thought that was a very interesting comment, and you reminded me of something I said earlier that was related to it. And the pedant in me makes me say that I referred to Shaw and I meant William Butler Yeats when I was talking about the
Yeats I've read.
Yeah, there you go. See, I knew there was a connection, but anyway, that's who I really meant. Any more questions?
I have one in chat. Al Naiman asks, does the artist plan out the canvas with sketches or other studies before committing the paint to the canvas?
Yes and no. You know, Hiram said everyone should keep a sketchbook of ideas. I guess I'm just more direct than that. But it depends on the piece. Some I'll go in with a charcoal pencil and draw it out beforehand. And some I'll start, you know, I'm still controlling the paint, I'm still controlling the colors. Others I will be splashing paint around, and maybe another example we showed, then I'll impose a grid over that for some form. But I don't do sketches or cartoons before the work, but I do often will, I'll have an idea or a shape, form, and I will draw that out in charcoal, and that's a great way to work. But that becomes the piece.
Yeah. Well, unless there are any more questions, we are running to the end of our hour, and I just want to thank Carey for being willing to participate. I think your work is very impressive, and this has been a really, I think, stimulating conversation. And I think we're going to take a break from Wil Talks. So Martha, do you want to fill everybody in on that?
Certainly, yes. I have a little bit of a Wil Talk announcement. We are taking a break for the month of August. Circle Gallery is going to be under a little bit of construction. We're going to do some cleaning, and also staff is going to take some vacations during August, as well as Wil. So we're going to take a short break, but what we're going to do for any of the member artists in our audience tonight, we're actually going to open sort of the same way you'd enter any MFA show. We're going to do one of those entry systems, but specifically for Wil Talks. So we use that space to review your work and come up with a schedule. It's not guaranteed if you enter that. It depends if we like your work, if it matches what we have going on recently, and if it's something that, you know, our schedules all work out. So, but it's basically a call for entry just for Wil Talks. So that'll be coming open, I believe, in August. So check out for that in the member memo when it comes out later. So yeah.
And thank to everyone who listened in and participated tonight. And I'll see you in the fall, I guess. Have a nice summer.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Wil. Appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you, Martha.